Track Talk back with another commentary of 1882. This game might be a little bit interesting because it has a early Northwest Rebellion, and then also the Trestle Bridge Private comes with a share of the CPR. So there will be 3 shares of the CPR basically bought, so to speak, at the end of this auction, which is a little bit unusual. We'll see how it works out for the players. J Ripe starting us off with a bid on the Northwest Rebellion, and we will see the Sketch also bid on Zeta, goes for the Trestle Bridge. So whoever wins the CP needs to be aware that they will have a share already purchased for them. So they may have a little bit of competition for the presidency in the first stock round if they're not careful. The other point of that is that the Trestle Bridge is investing in a share that it does not control where it pars. CP generally pars pretty high because 2 of the shares are already purchased by the Canadian Pacific, but they do not have control as they oftentimes would, where they would be able to par the company with the share in it. And the Northwest Rebellion receives its second bid. Sketch has 2 players on it. And there's a quick pull. Satori is happy to buy the cheap private and will be competing now for the Sketch. If he does not win the Sketch, we'll be at high risk of needing to buy the Canadian Pacific. And Satori wins, so he is on 2 privates. J-Ripe has 1 private left to give an opportunity, and so does LSR. So actually all 3 of the players remaining in the auction, including Zeta Zeta, are at risk for being at 0 revenue when the Canadian Pacific is available, and we'll see how they want to work that out amongst themselves and who falls on the Canadian Pacific. J Ripe bids 95, and LSR is keeping up with him. We'll see how high they bid this, and it goes to 145. Oh, sorry, no, it goes to 110. The Trestle Bridge is uncontested and goes for 145. So Zeta Zeta is probably happy to come out of the auction in this position. Unlikely that he will be forced to buy the Canadian Pacific, although he technically has 0 revenue, and was able to get the Trestle Bridge quite cheap. And it's also likely that the CPR stock will be parred high, which really increases the value of that Trestle Bridge private if you get a $100 stock for it. We'll probably be passing on the CPR here. He actually starts it. So he will have 3 shares in the CPR to start and a par them high, have a high value private. So, he could have passed and forced J Ripe to try and buy it. There is the risk that J Ripe also passes and the 2 other players get their revenue. But actually not terrible position for Zeta Zeta. He's going to end up with 3 shares in the Canadian Pacific and has a very expensive private in a company that can afford to buy it in. Pars that at 100, and we'll be able to buy 1 more share to get up to 4. J-Ripe has the next most cash, will be unable to steal the presidency from him, even if he was motivated to do so. So we'll need help to float the CPR, but I expect the other players will be cooperating because they don't have enough money to float on their own. LSR passes. J-Ripe has his pick of the litter, and high-value companies are usually the GT or potentially the CNR. HBR is okay as well, but the map position tends to be a little bit weaker. And we'll start the GT. Satori now also unable to par without help, and will be, looks like, investing in the CPR, meaning that this company is almost certain to float. So it looks like we will probably be seeing a 2-company start, which in a 4-player 1882 is not at all uncommon. And the GT also getting some investment. CPR now floated, and we will see the other players just continue to float the GT. Did the GT sell out? It did, so it will be floating up, which LSR is happy to get a little extra cash from the stock bump. CPR operating first. We'll see how he elects to lay his track. Looks like he will be hoping to get into Western Canada, bypassing the expensive track on Medicine Hat. This does mean that he will have only 1 2-train to run in the next operating round, and as a result only buys a single 2. GT will he head through the double dit towards the 00, and does. Probably will see a token there just to ensure that he can have that for the rest of the game in case the QLL were to float unexpectedly. and he has the opportunity to buy two trains, may actually buy three, as he can run down to Chabanon as well. And we do see the three two trains, and that means that he will be running pretty well in this next operating round. The other players really have no options in order to buy shares, and expect we will see them passing to retain priority here. CPR completes its run to Western Canada and will be running its single two train. Will we see it buy another two train and hope to run up to Saskatoon in the next operating round? It looks like not. GT probably running towards Shaunavon, yep, and will be running its three trains. The other players now have a little bit more capital, but still, so Satori will have just enough if he sells down his 3 CPR shares to float a new company, which it looks like he's looking to do. We'll be taking the QLL, probably a little bit worried about the status of these yellow cities. However, there would be one for him should he elect to float the HBR, but we'll be taking the QLL instead. Zeta now left with money to buy up a cheap CPR if he chooses to, and will do so. LSR probably going to be taking a paying CPR share as well, and does. JRIPE is going to be passing, leaving Satori to float and giving Zeta the priority into the next stock round. So Zeta, looking at operating order, is the president of the CPR, has no option to dump. JRIPE also without an opportunity to dump, and also no privates to buy in for that company. Zeta does have an expensive private, maybe looking at the threes and hoping to buy that in early. Doesn't lay the Saskatoon city, and we will see if he buys his private in. Just buys the second two train, leaving the GT to continue run three trains and pay out. Well, he withholds, maybe noticing that he has a parasite in the form of LSR sapping his revenue, and prefers to just keep the money in the company. QLL's first operation, and will be laying the double dit down to Moosinen. I don't fully understand why people like to run south here. It seems like it would be better to try and get up to Hudson Bay and Wadena. You are laying track that's helpful for the HBR, but this is very short-term track in terms of its revenue down the road. So just lays the single dit and buys into the threes. Will he buy his privates? He does. This eliminates the sketch, and also the Northwest Rebellion has occurred with no yellow track evaporating. So maybe looking to sell this company down and start a new one. Zeta was not able to buy his private and is still sitting on the CPR. LSR just going to be sitting on his shares. Will sell down the GT and still does not have enough money to float, so not sure what he's looking to do here. I guess just paying QLL shares. It's not really in any danger for a dump there, so not sure what motivated that. QLL now has some cheap GT shares to buy if he likes, instead going for the CPR to start. LSR passing, and Satori looks like he will be on last in priority then, leaving Zeta to continue having priority. So LSR now buys a share, losing himself second priority, and instead will be going last. And everyone else passes, leaving JRIPE on the GT with priority, unable to dump this company as a result of the market share. So hopefully we'll see Zeta buy in his expensive private here and get us off to the races, so to speak. So blocking the CNR from running south, I always like when a player is able to take advantage of that, and hopefully we'll be buying a 3 train here. Does, and then sits on its private until the next operating round. QLL, will he continue this path of laying towards Moonsoon? Looks like it. And we'll be running, so he actually tokens that. That's even worse. That track is not very useful, and we'll be running 2 trains that way. The revenue of the early game run here really doesn't justify the long-term deficit that he is creating for himself here. GT does have green track available to him and will be upgrading Asanobia as he's running 2 trains out of it. And now that the other players have sold out a little bit, is happy to pay out and hopefully secures himself the last 3. Sketch now running up and towards the Hudson Bay, so we'll have a very early east-west run if he chooses to take that, and probably will be buying in his Trestle Bridge. He actually passes, so just going to be continuing to sit on the Trestle Bridge. This company has very inconsistent revenue. Could be high, could be low, just depending on the track that the other players lay, and would really like to see him get that cash into his private coffers, so uncertain why he's making the decision he is. Also interesting that he chose to lay a curve here instead of just expecting to run through Flin Flon. He controls 2 of these yellow cities, so he could upgrade 1 and basically guarantee the availability of the yellow city in the next turn. So continuing to lay Moosomin, and we'll run 3 trains now. Revenue's a little bit better here, but still I think the long-term cost of this opening is going to outweigh its benefit. GT now running 4 trains and probably will be heading towards Moose Jaw just to get an extra run. And then also we'll be hoping to get into the Hudson Bay in the near future. Running very hot with 4 trains and pays it out. So missed opportunity from Zeta here to buy in his private, and the LSR is not a president, so reasonable to be sitting on his private as he had opportunity to buy it in. J-Ripe with priority would have to sell down pretty heavily to float here, maybe just buying paying shares. And is reserving the presidency of the HBR, but not expecting to float it this turn. This does give the opportunity to another player to basically compete for the HBR, force J-Ripe to sell down the GT and then steal the GT. The GT is a very strong company, has a 3 train, has money, has good track. So a little bit of a risky play here. We'll see if the other players pressure him. Satori will also just reserve the presidency of the CNR. CNR is not looking so hot this game. Will have a hard time getting into the south track as long as CPR is not asleep at the wheel and does not help him at Saskatoon. And Zeta now has no company to float as there are no neutral tokens and will be just buying paying shares. GT will be floating up. LSR, similar position, cannot float a company, which is unfortunate as he does not have a company presidency and has no opportunity to buy in the Northwest Rebellion. So probably just spreading his cash around. Sells out of the GT, sells out of the CPR, so maybe competing for one of these other presidencies. These other players are going to have a hard time defending them. So we'll be competing for the HBR. J-Ripe may be kicking himself for paring this company so high, make it very hard to defend, and leaves the GT vulnerable if he makes the effort. The LSR player will be unable to steal the GT from him as he is sold out of that company. But one of the other players could potentially do so. J-Ripe passes. Will he just surrender control of the HBR? And it looks like he will be. So basically just giving LSR a max par company at a discount. He sells out and may be looking to take over the CNR, but this company will be easier to defend as J-Ripe has much less cash to attack than LSR did. So LSR gets a $1,000 treasury for only the investment of 4 shares. That's a big win for him. We'll be able to buy in his Northwest Rebellion as a result. Satori just watching the CNR shares be bought, and LSR now has some cheaper shares to buy in the HBR. J-Ripe continuing to buy the CNR, again, will have to sell down in order to take this presidency. Satori can defend here, maybe hoping to call J-Ripe's bluff. He will have to sell 2 shares in order to do it. He is $1 shy, which is very unfortunate, of a single sale, allowing him to take the presidency here. So we'll see if So JRIP actually saves him the dilemma. I may have held the shares there to put Satori under some pressure. You may be able to force him to sell a share to defend. But JRIP just is happy to tank value, and we'll be looking for paying shares in the QLL and the CPR. Zeta also sells down a GT and buys a CPR from the IPO. JRIP now buys the market share. Zeta may have been able to see that coming. He may have been wise to buy his own market share, although I'm always hesitant to do that. But it looks like the other player is almost certainly going to buy it, so why not buy it yourself and then force him to buy the IPO? And JRIP still looking for shares, so Satori will almost certainly have priority in the next stock round, which looks like is the case. CPR now has the opportunity to lay track to get into Hudson Bay. Will, of course, not have a train capable of making that east-west run. We'll need a 5 train. So in the near future, we'll be looking at that $100 bonus. And running all 3 of his trains, and pays that out. Does not have permanent train money, but has a 3 train, so not in imminent danger. There will be no added train to the roster as a result of the Sketch company going away, so we're looking at only 4 trains, permanent trains, before the D. HBR now, first operation, maybe looking to head towards Hudson Bay, and also will be hoping to get into that double dip, but of course, double O, but of course will not be able to run through it. Buys the 4 train, resting the 2s, which the CPR and particularly the GT are sorry to hear, and we'll just be sitting on a single 4 train. QLL with 2 3 trains, maybe looking to upgrade the Pile of Bones tile. We'll have to upgrade it south as cannot afford the track cost. Or, well, it could afford the track cost, but why give the HBR an easy revenue center? Instead, laying a 3rd track into Eastern Canada. Again, only has 2 trains, so not entirely sure what he's getting at here. Seems a little bit low yield. And pays out. GT single train here. Still looks like blocked at Humboldt as the Trestle Bridge has not been bought in, and maybe just upgrading some track as a result. Does upgrade the double O, and we'll probably be looking to lay friendly track with the QLL for a double run at those 60 value revenue locations. Running his 3 train. Does he look for a 4 here? Looks like he's happy to pass. CPR, now running a single 3 train and still sitting on the Trestle Bridge, really hoping to see him buy that in. Buys the 4, which means that he will not have money to buy in his trestle. We may see that Trestle Bridge just evaporating as we are only 1 train away from the 5s, and we will be looking at the CNR floating in the next stock round. Similar situation with the Northwest Rebellion if it's not bought in here, but he will have a better opportunity to do so. Underwhelming run from the HBR, but able to buy in his private. And QLL actually not willing to cooperate with the GT, which seems a little bit short-sighted, especially for a company with 2 3 trains. GT probably a little bit upset to have missed the opportunity, but maybe looking to lay track to bypass the DIT and run from Pile of Bones into Asanobia into Shaunavon. Instead of upgrading Moose Jaw, and happy to run his 3 train on the same route. Satori now with priority and can easily float the CNR. CNR will be looking at buying the last 4 and the first 5, so no reason not to do that. Sells a CPR and is going to work on floating the CNR. CPR is no longer looking like such a great company, has no cash, will be probably train tight when the 6s come out, and then will be, well, the 6s will rust the 3 and the train limit doesn't drop until the 6s come out anyway, so it's not going to be train tight, but is looking at buying a train out of pocket or heavily withholding. So not the greatest investment opportunity. Imagine we will not see this Trestle Bridge bought in, and he is just paying share. CNR is getting some help on floating, although both of those shares look to have been bought from the market, so still needs 2 shares to be bought in order to float, which he has the cash to do. And he buys the IPO. Zeta is willing to help, and LSR buying the CPR. Again, got to be a little bit careful with the CPR. Probably don't want to hold 2 shares in that company in the near future. JRipe buying an HBR. HBR doesn't have good track in the immediate future, but once Brown opens up, maybe hoping to improve his situation. CNR continues to sell, and the HBR as well. And we will see the last GT stock sell, and the rest of the players look like they may be passing. So Zeta will have priority. Zeta does not have an opportunity to dump the CPR as nobody has invested 2 shares. Where will he go with the CPR? Swift current upgrade, that does give the CNR the opportunity to link in at Saskatoon with 2 yellow track lays, which will give the CNR great track for the rest of the game, as it will have access to that east-west run. So may have been well advised to try and block it out of Saskatoon a little bit harder. And he pays that out. CNR first operation does not look towards Saskatoon, is going to be heading toward the northwest. Maybe a missed opportunity there. Can't guarantee that that Saskatoon track is going to be there forever. In fact, the GT should be able to upgrade and get in there if it wants to. There is no split double curve here, so we'll not be able to get there right this turn. Can upgrade Moose Jaw into Swift Current though. Buying trains over from the QLL and maybe looking for the 4 and a 5 here. Does buy the first 5. HBR now has access to Brown and 5 trains. So now the HBR will be able to loop back into Saskatoon or Swift Current and complete its east-west run. And does token Swift Current? I guess it sees that there was a risk of a token on Swift Current from the GT, whereas there's not really a risk from a token on Saskatoon in the next operating round. So maybe I'll secure both of those tokens, or at least neutral token Saskatoon. So HBR in infinitely better position than it was just a moment ago. Runs his 4 train, and we said earlier that it will need a 5 train to do this east-west run, which it is about to pick up. So in pretty good position. JRipe operating the GT, and will upgrade Asanobia, kind of a not high priority upgrade, and will be picking up. Will he withhold for the first 6? And does. So first resting event after the 4s, and the QLL will now be on the hook for a 6 train. Can't shuffle a 4 over, but that will just be kind of delaying the inevitable. There are currently no neutral tokens on the map. The player starting is CPR, does not have a neutral token, so cannot cause the Canadian National to float, but could take the presidency if another player drops the neutral token. So a little bit of a standoff on those neutral tokens right now. But the CN will probably be needed to bring out the Ds. QLL upgrades the Brown, and will he shuffle trains here? Looks like he's selling for the 6, so we'll end up with the second 6. Only the D trains are available now, and there is one company, the CPR, that is looking for a permanent train when those D trains come out. So Zeta may be in a rough position. This is probably going to cost him his game, which means that JRipe or potentially HBR are in quite good positions. Satori does have 2 companies. One of those companies, the QLL, is a little bit underwhelming and doesn't have a whole lot of track for the CNR. So I think Zeta is in a rough position, but the other three players do have some varying degrees of potential to take this still. Zeta upgrading Saskatoon, doesn't have money for a token, and is far, far away from a permanent train. Looks like he's resigned to just emergency buying it when the time comes. HBR laying track to link up, and potentially we'll see a token on Shanavan to block the GT. Not sure where he's going with this, but does drop the neutral token. So that potentially gives the CPR player a chance to get some additional capital. Unfortunately, floating the Canadian National is not going to be a get-out-of-jail-free card for him, because it will be another company with a train requirement, and he's going to need to buy 2 D trains if he takes it. CNR now, upgrading Spiritwood. Again, not in no rush to, it sounds like, get into the track with the rest of the players, and will just run one of its trains. Doesn't even token Spiritwood. Did it have the cash for it? It did not. So not an ideal situation. It has 2 trains, can only run one of them. QLL, 6 train, starting to upgrade these double O cities, and has a neutral token but no other way to control track. 6 train has a pretty good run for now, but is at the mercy of the other companies. All 3 of the brown cities are now laid, and GT will be running its 6 train. Entering into the stock round, LSR actually has the most cash. Maybe seeing him float the CN, which would be terrible news for the CPR. But the CPR player himself is also not in a great position to start the CN. In terms of share density, it's pretty even. JRIPE has 1 additional share, but is pretty close to the cert limit, and there are no yellow companies. So may see multiple players hitting their cert limit this OR in the stock round. Zeta sells down the CPR, realizing that he's going to be resting the train with the CN, and so that's interesting. Does have the capital to start the CN, has sold down the CPR, which would potentially let him, lose minimal value as he's emergency buying the D, and instead invests in the HBR. So I guess he's just hoping these other companies will pay out enough to purchase his D train for the CPR, and then hopefully reinvest into the company in the next stock round. LSR probably will be floating the CN here. Sells a CPR, which is now filling the market, so JRIPE will be stuck with a share in this company, and will we see him float the CN? Sells down another share and does float the CN. So this is guaranteeing that the CPR will be forced to buy a D train. It won't be until the second operating round of this set, as the CPR is guaranteed to operate before the CN. But Zeta is hoping to have enough cash, after the first operating round to not have to sell shares to buy that D train, which seems unlikely. And we will see HBR bought, so people are just looking for paying shares. HBR will be operating probably before the CN. If it gets sold down, it will not necessarily. So may be able to run both of its trains one more time. Satori buying a QLL. QLL seems like a kind of dead letter, but we will see if that investment pays out. Zeta is still looking for HBR shares, paying shares, so hoping that this company will float up, get a little extra stock value before he ultimately probably will be forced to sell out. CN continues to float, and other players are looking at the QLL. CNR gets sold down once, and he buys another QLL. Zeta buying the CNR, the cheap share that was sold, I think. Yep. And the LSR will continue to float. JRIPE, players are starting to run out of opportunities to invest. Zeta is still looking at selling down all those shares. Doesn't mean he's further from his cert limit, but he has fewer safe opportunities to invest as a result. And he will buy CNR. LSR continuing to float, and Zeta is almost out of shares that he can buy. Will the other players pass and force LSR to go last in priority? Zeta is still looking for shares. There's a CNR he could buy, maybe worth it to him to buy it. However, he has to be thinking to himself, he's shortly going to be needing every last dollar. He's going to lose $24 by buying the IPO there. Will the return on his investment exceed the hit he takes in just one operating round? It seems unlikely, so maybe looking to pass here. Instead, buying a GT, which is a paying share. So probably we'll see him buy that last one and hopefully get the stock bump again. He does elect to buy that CNR share, as we discussed. Maybe not going to pay for itself, so if you're looking to buy a D-Train, maybe not the best share. Could have bought that GT share instead. Anyway, he's now at cert limit. All the players are at cert limit other than Satori, and LSR, having 2 presidencies, is 1 share ahead of his opponents. So looking pretty good for LSR here. As a result of Zeta's last-minute stock purchases, LSR is not only in a great position, but maintains priority. So could dump on Zeta if desired and basically ensure that a bankruptcy. So if LSR gets far enough ahead, may just dump the HBR and then try and force Zeta bankrupt in the next set of operating rounds to just end the game and take the win. CPR, last operation for this 4-train, and doesn't lay track. Will he even withhold? He probably should be withholding here, since he only controls 20% of the company and 30% is wasted. He's going to need every last dollar for this D-train. HBR happy to run his 2 trains. Does have an east-west route with the 5. And did he lay a token anywhere? No. So we'll be running for basically a ton of money as a result of his east-west run. First operation of the Canadian National, should be seeing the D-Train come out here, and looks like the Canadian National is looking to bypass Swift Current for its own east-west run. Buys the 4-train and will be looking to upgrade it, and the 4-train's rust. CNR now passes track and will be running a 5-train as a 3-train because he has no money and very little option moving forward. Pays out. QLL performing an upgrade on the 00 City and basically just running a pretty minimal route. GT looking to bypass the DIT to incrementally improve its route, and running his 6. Also places a neutral token on the 00 City, so I think he's just basically throwing this token away, not actually hoping to secure that run, because running into the 30 value offboard is really not high yield for him. So probably just hoping to hurt the Canadian National a little bit. CPR has no train, will maybe look to block the Canadian National from getting into Western Canada, but just doesn't pass just passes his track, and is on the hook here. Will have to sell, a ton of shares, and avoids bankruptcy, but has lost the game at this point. LSR happy to run his east-west and does get the CN a east-west run if it wants it. CNR still has no money for track and is, basically irrelevant at this point. CN running for the first time will be potentially looking to get into that 00 City. The HBR does have cash for the upgrade, so maybe hoping to get a little bit of a better east-west run into northern Alberta in the future. QLL, no money, really, and limited options here. GT does have some fair track, but probably will not be enough to overcome these D runs. Last operating round in the set, first operation of the D train in the CPR, does have good track, but is so far behind after those stock sales, is in a lot of trouble. HBR, same route. Actually doesn't pay to upgrade the 00 City, probably realizes that depending on what he lays, it may be at risk for letting the CNR out of its hole. So instead just going to look to block the other players from getting into Wadena. CNR, same position as before. CN is running east to west with the bonus. QLL, not really consequential track lays. And final operation GT is looking to eventually get into Hudson Bay, it looks like, but will not significantly improve its run. So we are entering the stock round here. There's $5,000 left in the bank. We may see the bank break, although there are some low revenue companies, particularly CNR, which make that a little bit less likely. So this may drag out for another set after this one. Anyway, all the players are at their cert limit with the exception of Zeta and Satori. Neither of those players are in contention to win, so it looks like LSR has won this game. We will see him just make small adjustments to his stock portfolio and continue to run his two companies, play keep away with the track, and run away with this game. So I will skip to the end here and just confirm. It looks like LSR wins by a fair amount. And we did see some action in the Northwest eventually, but there was nothing that ever came close, it looks like, to challenging his lead. So LSR is able to walk away with the game here and played pretty well. We will be back in the future with additional commentary. Thank you for listening.